Hi, welcome. My name is Lainey Rose, and I'm the events manager here at East City Bookshop. It's wonderful to have you all today. Thanks so much for being here in person and for tuning into our live stream if you're watching that way. Events and book clubs are back in full swing at the shop, so please check out our website for our events calendar. We have so many exciting things upcoming in the month of April, and we're ending the month with the store's 7th birthday on Independent Bookstore Day. We also have 14 book clubs, and if you're here at tonight's event, I'd like to recommend our Wine and Inks book club for those 21 and up who still read YA, and Queering the Narrative, where every month we pick a genre, and anyone in the club can read any queer book within that genre. And for the month of April, we are reading young adult sci-fi fantasy. So hey, you're here, pick up a book and then come to our club April 18th. Before we get into tonight's event, some housekeeping details. Number 1, we appreciate you wearing your mask while you're seated at the event and in the signing line. Number 2, if you need a restroom, it's upstairs past the cash registers and the greeting cards. Number 3, if you're watching from home and experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat. My colleague is monitoring and can help if necessary. And number 4, we will have time for questions tonight for both in-person and virtual attendees. So even if you are watching via Zoom, you can participate. Please put those questions in the Q&A feature so that we can see them and ask on your behalf. And in the chat feature, tell us where you're tuning in from. Tell us what magical power you would like to have, all the fun things. For those of you in the audience, sorry, no chat feature for you, but it'll still be fun. And most importantly, if you need to purchase a copy of the book, we have our copies available. We're happy to help you out with that. They are all upstairs at the cash register and can be purchased prior to the signing line. As our events manager, I'm naturally excited about every event we do. That's why we do them. But as a lover of romance, fantasy, adventure, and young adult novels, I could not be more excited for this event in particular. FT's books have always struck my heart, and I am giddy with delight that we get to host them here with us today to welcome Spellbound into the world. Edison Rooker isn't sure what to expect when he enters the office of Antonia Hex, the powerful sorceress who runs a call center for magical emergencies. He doesn't have much experience with hexes or curses. He doesn't even have magic, but he does have a plan to regain the access to the magical world he lost when his grandmother passed. Antonia is intimidating, but she gives him a job and a new name, Rook, both of which he's happy to accept. Now all Rook has to do is to keep his spellbinder, an illegal magical detection device hidden from the magical consortium, and contend with Sun, the grumpy and annoyingly cute apprentice to Antonia's rival colleague. But dealing with competition isn't so bad, as Sun seems to pop up more and more. Rook minds less and less. But when the consortium gets wind of Rook's spellbinder, they come for Antonia, and all alone, Rook runs to the only magical person he knows, Sun. Now, Rook and Sun have no choice but to work together to get their mentors back or face losing their magic forever. Our author of the evening is F.T. Lukens, who is a New York Times bestselling author of YA speculative fiction, including the novels So This Is Ever After and In Deeper Waters, as well as other science fiction and fantasy works. Their contemporary fantasy novels, The Rules and Regulations for Mediating Myths and Magic, was a 2017 Sibelius Award finalist in YA speculative fiction and the Forward Indies Book of the Year gold winner for YA fiction, and won the Bisexual Book Award for speculative fiction. FT resides in North Carolina with their spouse, 3 kids, 3 dogs, and 3 cats. That's a lot. And joining them in conversation is Jessica Spotswood, who is the author of the fantasy trilogy The Cahill Witch Chronicles and the contemporary novels Wild Swans and The Last Summer of the Garrett Girls. She's the editor of the feminist anthologies A Tyranny of Petticoats and The Radical Element, and the co-editor of Toil and Trouble. Her most recent novel is Great or Nothing, a co-written World War II reimagining of Little Women. Just lives in Washington, D.C., where she works for the D.C. Public Libraries. We love libraries. Robin Talley is a queer author who grew up in Southwest Virginia and now lives in Washington, D.C. with her wife and their rambunctious kiddos. She did a digital communications work for LGBTQ rights, women's rights, educational equality, and other progressive causes for 15 years before she turned to writing full-time, and is now the New York Times bestselling author of 7 novels for teen readers, including The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre, Music from Another World, Pulp, and As I Descend. Though I have talked enough for this evening, so we're going to welcome our authors. Thank you all for being here. Give them a big old round of applause.
Hi, everybody. One of these mics is on, the other 2 are not. I don't remember which is which.
Hello.
They should all be on. Oh, they're all on. Yay. All right.
Now it's on?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Welcome. Thank you all so much for coming to celebrate FT's new book launch. Hooray. Let's do a round of applause. All right. So now you already know who we are. And I think we've got a few questions for FT, and then we'll take questions from the audience as well. But so let's start out with, we're here to celebrate Spellbound, this amazing book that Jess and I got to read early. I'm betting that most people here haven't got a chance to read it yet, since it's not actually even out yet until tomorrow.
We'll be careful of spoilers.
Yeah, you might, I guess you can buy like an illegal copy tonight. I think like a, yeah. But so yes, we'll be very careful not to spoil, which is going to be very difficult because there's a particular twist right around the 67% mark that I have so many questions about that I cannot ask a single one, just as we're talking about. But anyway, so we will go with the more general. Tell us how you got the idea for this one, please.
So Spellbound, the magic system is where I started with the world building and with the creation of the novel. And actually I was had been in Atlanta for Dragon Con. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it's a big science fiction and fantasy convention that lasts over Labor Day weekend. So I had just spent 5 days in a big city hanging out with a bunch of nerds, and was on my way back to rural North Carolina and was driving and just started kind of to think about what would a magic system look like in Atlanta? How would it work? And called my brother, who, if anyone's ever read the acknowledgments of my other books, you'll see my brother Rob shows up all the time. And I called him and we started talking about internal versus external magic and how an external magic field would work in an urban setting. And that's really kind of where the magical Wi-Fi idea came from. And that's where the book and the world building really started, was from that conversation. And then from there, I started thinking about, what would be the conflicts that would come from that with a magical world with that kind of system, and what would the characters look like that lived in that world. And then there was just some tropes that I knew I wanted to do. If you've read any of my other books, I love tropes and love fantasy tropes and romance tropes. So I really wanted to write a grumpy sunshine romance dynamic. So I did. And I also wanted to write like a rivals to more kind of situation. So that's kind of where the plot and the character arcs and the romance and all that kind of stuff started, from just kind of thinking about tropes I haven't done before and I wanted to try.
Wow.
That was really long-winded.
No, please be long-winded. This is an awesome, exciting book, and I love that it is full of tropes, and I love that it is full of creative, interesting world building, and it's really, really exciting. Now we'll talk about world building more, but first I wanted to ask, as someone who has also written books, that I think sometimes I have a goal when I'm writing them of being like light and easy to read and fun for readers. But I often have found that the process of writing them is not at all light and easy and fun. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about whether that's been your experience as well, or maybe for you, this is indeed light and frothy and easy to write and you have no problem.
No, no. Humor and comedy is kind of where I excel, what I'm good at. And one of the things I struggle with though when writing like a funny book or some humor is knowing when to be funny and knowing when not to be. And that's why I have amazing editors that will, when we're working on the drafts and stuff, we'll say, oh no, be as funny as you want in this moment, but in this moment, pull it back, make this a little more serious, dig in with the, characterization right here, and then maybe break up this action sequence with a funny line or something like that. So there's a balance to writing a book like Spellbound or So This Is Ever After. And then, but it's still work. It's still work. Spellbound took 4 months to write and 10 months to edit. So the writing process itself took 4 months, and then, but just fixing it took a long time.
Okay. One of my questions was, if you could talk a little bit about your critique partner process, or whether you use critique partners, whether there's, or beta readers, or how that works for you. Robin, I was saying earlier, is one of my critique partners, and she's so brilliant and it helps me a lot. So I'm curious how that works for you.
I have some folks that I'll send sample things to, but I actually write pretty solitary. But for Spellbound, there was definitely a lot of help that I received from some authenticity readers along the whole process. So from character creation through the first kind of developmental edits all the way to through the arc, there were authenticity readers that were involved, and they were super helpful. And I thank them so much for all their hard work, that they helped with making sure that the representation and the inclusion in the book was as accurate as possible. So, but for beta readers, and I do have a few friends that I'll send stuff to that are not in the publishing industry that I send them to, and they will let me know, oh, this is enjoyable, or oh no, this is not. And then I'll take, some of their suggestions and work them in.
I'm wondering, since you mentioned world building, and obviously world building is a huge part of all of your work, and it's so different from book to book, which I think is really interesting, but it's always very complex and very real. And so I think you mentioned that with this book, you did start with the world building, and that was your starting point. I'm wondering, is that always where you start? Do you always have world building in mind before you get to characters?
No, that was just the process for this one. That was just the way Spellbound happened to work out, was world building first and then everything after. So This Is Ever After was basically the way that one worked. Is I asked my friends, I was like, what are your favorite romance tropes? And they all sent me different romance tropes. And then I just kind of was like, okay, I'll use this one. I'll subvert this one. And that's how I built that book. It was really just off of tropes and vibes. So yeah, it just really depends on what I'm trying to achieve. So yeah, it's really different for each one. What about when you guys write?
I absolutely start with characters first. I feel like my books are very vibe forward and character forward, not so much with the plot. Yeah,
Nothing wrong with just
I
vibes.
definitely think of characters and what do they want? What are they scared of? How can I make that happen to them? That sort of thing.
If I try to start with world building, the problem is that I then wind up completely changing the world building by the time I get to the end, and so it's just a fail. Like I wrote a book called The Love Curse of Melody McIntyre, which is a book. It's a contemporary romantic comedy about a high school stage manager who hates actors because she's a tech crew person, and then she, hot spoiler, falls in love with an actor, and oh no. But so that book originally started out as having magic in it. It was like a fantasy. It was like a paranormal, fantasy world. And so I started with this really complicated world building, okay, how does the magic system work in this world? And what powers does everybody have? And by the end, it was completely contemporary romantic comedy. And I just started taking out the magic piece by piece. Well, this doesn't work, so I'll take this out. Oh, this doesn't work. And then next thing I know, it's just completely realistic. And so I spent all this time on world building. By the end, I'm like, well, the world building that really matters is the friend group and where everybody sits in the cafeteria. So I wound up with a detailed map of all of that. So that doesn't answer at all the question of whether I start with world building or not. I guess the answer is just that world building is a struggle for me. I think. Matching it up with plot is its own complicated thing. Yeah.
And for Spellbound, yeah, I did start with the world building, but also like I said, it took a long time to edit. And one of the reasons was that the scene that I thought was the first scene actually ended up being the first scene of chapter 6 or something like that. So it was really, I wrote that scene and I was like, yeah, this is going to be the beginning. And then was like, oh no, this doesn't work as the beginning. This is going to work as in the middle, and then had to back all the way up to what actually became the first scene.
Is it the scene where Sun is coming up with a box of cursed objects in the welcome mat?
No, that scene actually wasn't in the original draft.
No way.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. That scene was
Or we're just spoiling it for you.
So there's a scene, the scene that originally was the first scene, was the scene where Rook takes the call with the little girl with the pig nose. But the scene with Sun and the welcome mat, and you guys will get this in a little bit, that scene was not in the original outline. And then when I had written chapter 1 and chapter 2, because I think that's chapter 3, I was like, oh no, Sun is introduced too late and I needed to introduce them earlier. And I was like, how can I introduce them? Well, I will give them a cursed doll and I will make them drop the box that is holding the cursed doll and turn it into a horror movie situation for a little bit.
I love a cursed doll.
The cursed doll gets a hold of a letter opener. I'm so sorry, we're spoiling this for you all, but it's just hysterical.
It's very early in the book.
It's scary, but it's also very, very funny.
It is. So wait a second. You mentioned an outline. Does that mean that you do in fact outline your books first?
As though that's the most ludicrous thing anyone could do.
Do they not read like they've been outlined?
No, I do. I'm just impressed because I don't outline. And so I'm always like fascinated by people.
So you're a pantser? Is that
I
what you
am,
Yeah. I am 100% a plotter, like down to the dialogue in each scene and what each piece of dialogue is accomplishing in each scene. Now, does that mean that I don't stray from that? No. I mean, like I'll write it out. And then as I'm actually writing, if a different idea comes along, which happens often, or if I get to a point and I'm like, oh, that really doesn't work, then I will change the outline. So the outline's not set in stone, but the way my brain works, it has to exist, because when I write things like nebulous middle scene, then I don't know what to do when I get there.
So I thought I was the most particular outliner in the world but now I know that is not true. Because you outline your dialogue, really individual lines of dialogue. You have notes for what they're going to say, and then you change it into actual words when you get to the writing part.
Yeah, I'll write down. Sorry, that was very North Carolina. Did you hear that? I'll write down. No, I'll write down what what I would like the characters to say and what the dialogue will accomplish for each scene. And then when I'm writing, if it still fits, then it goes in, and if it doesn't, then I'll change it. But yeah, I'm I struggle with social stuff a lot. And so I listen to how people talk a lot at times, and when people watching and stuff, and I'll listen to dialogue and how folks are speaking to each other. And then I will write some stuff down so that.
That's why your dialogue is so good.
Do you ever write in coffee shops? I write in coffee shops a lot, and it's really good for eavesdropping.
I used to before 2020. But also I find coffee shops have a lot of noise that distracts me. Yeah.
When I actually want to stop eavesdropping and work, I have to put on
earphones. Yeah.
Sorry, I've gotten so caught up. I've lost my place in my notes. By the way, I'm not multitasking. I'm not like sending memes to people. I've got my questions on my phone. Okay. So getting to back to the specifics of this book in particular. I was intrigued by the complexity of the magical community in Spellbound, which is really, really interesting. And you're all going to start reading it and you're going to see what I'm talking about very quickly. The way various people move within the community and how there is this wide variety of different magical statuses that people can have, and how all of that affects Rook in particular is one of the two main characters, who for much of this book is operating in kind of an in-between place within the magical community. And I was wondering if you'd talk a little about your thinking with creating the dynamics of that community.
Yeah, so Rook is the main character, and he's been he was part of the magical community for a while, but when he loses his grandmother, who is his sole caregiver, the magical community says, well, you're not magic, so you can't stay. And so they kind of force him out. And so in the beginning of the novel, he is the outsider looking in and has to figure out a way how to get back into being around magic and being around being able to access that. And So I wanted to, when I was creating kind of the different characters and like you said, how they're moving through this, magical world, Rook is definitely the outsider, and then Sun is the apprentice that follows all the rules, is hyper focused on magic, and is the insider of the community. And that kind of lends to their dynamic of rivals, and also, Grumpy Sunshine, like we talked about. And then there are two mentors, and the one mentor, Fable, is also very rule driven and is operating within the lines. And then Antonia Hex, who is Ryan LaSala's favorite character. So if you know Ryan, he loves Antonia, and Antonia is kind of this, she has made some mistakes in her past, and it follows her, and she's been relegated to curse work, which is messy, and even though she's the most powerful sorcerer, and I wanted to write a character who you weren't ever quite sure what their motives were. And Antonia, even by the end, you're really not quite sure what she was trying to do. So she's very morally gray, and she's super fun to write. And it keeps Rook especially on edge throughout the novel, because he's like, is Antonia, what is she doing? Is she helping me? Is she using me? Is she a friend? Is she not? So it was a fun dynamic to write.
And jumping off that, can you talk a little bit more about the way found family operates? Like, I love found family, talking about tropes we love. I love found family. Former theater kid here too. So
found family it shows up in all of my books, because it is my favorite trope. And I feel like it's something that is relatable to a lot of folks, that if you grow up and move away, or or if you're in the LGBTQ community, sometimes you have to find your family, and it's something that's important to me personally. So in this novel, it works as Rook is looking for a place, and Antonia is looking for a place too. She's pretty lost herself, and so are some of the other characters, and they rely on each other, and form a pretty tight-knit group. And at the end, spoiler, but they I don't want to spoil it, but yeah,
They all die at the end.
They
right?
all, yes.
It's the romantic comedy.
That's an Adam Silvera book.
They're all in the LGBTQ section, right? So,
Yeah.
but since we're talking about found family and books that people have read, I have been able to read, can you talk about So This Is Ever After and the found family there? I just want to hear you talk about So This Is Ever After.
So This Is Ever After is my ode to D&D and role-playing games, and also like just every fun fantasy trope ever, and those characters are I call them my chaos children, and they really, the fun thing about writing that book and creating those characters is I really did start with, okay, I need a rogue, I need a bard, I need a wizard, and did that and based the characters off of those tropes. And then in the beginning of the book, since it starts at the end, I relied really heavily on what people's perceptions are of those characters. Like, oh, we know the rogue is going to loot the room and leave, and we know the bard is going to be a little flirty, play a song, But by the end of that book, all of those expectations of those roles are subverted, because Bethany the bard is the smartest person in the room. And
she's very flirty.
she is very flirty, but she's also like the person who runs the kingdom, basically. And like Lila the rogue, who you expect to be, the first person being like, I'm out. even though she's still thieving by the end of the book, she's the most loyal. So it was really, really fun to play around with that and to have these really different personalities come together as a group.
I'm going to assume the answer is yes, but I'm just going to ask, do you do D&D? I mean, do you play? And if so, what category do you play as?
I have not played in a very long time. I played a lot in college. I was part of the science fiction and fantasy club, which we called Skiffy. And my few of my friends actually are here in DC, and they I told them I was going to be here, and I don't think anybody made it, but so we were kind of a found family too. And but yes, we played D&D, and we played all kinds of role-playing games. And then I have played a lot of World of Warcraft. I don't anymore because it's a time vampire, and I was like, wow, spend a lot of time playing World of Warcraft, so I actually had to go like cold turkey and stop. But in WoW, I played a blood elf mage, and then my alt was a undead rogue.
I know what some of those words mean, not all of them. Sounds awesome. So yeah, this is a great transition, I guess, to talking about other fantasy stories that you take inspiration from, because clearly, you do a lot of playing with tropes and a lot of, so can you talk a little bit more about other stories that you draw from in your writing?
Yeah, I was an 80s and 90s kid, and I read a lot of fantasy from those time periods. So a lot of Douglas Adams, and Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I actually talked about this the other day. I got it for my birthday when I was 13 years old from my older brother, and he gave it to me. And recently, my mom has passed away, and we have had to go through some of her belongings, and I found a picture of me holding that book as a 13-year-old with the wrapping paper in my lap from when I received it for my birthday. And Douglas Adams is his humor and his way with language really influenced my humor, and how it really broadened my my perception of how language could be used to be funny, and how like the absurd can be used in like fantasy novels and sci-fi novels, and to be funny, but also to like have a message.
Can you tell us about some other books that you've read lately that you enjoy? Or recommendations for the crowd?
I mentioned Ryan LaSala. The Honeys is a masterpiece. It is so great. It's a horror, YA horror novel about bees. And it's amazing. I have read, and it comes out later this year, The Spells We Cast by Jason June. And it is cowboy magic. And it's awesome. I really enjoyed that one. And for a romance, I read Fake Dates and Mooncakes by Cher Lee, which comes out I think next month. And it's a really, really great romance. If you guys, it's pitched as Heartstopper meets Crazy Rich Asians.
Wait, say the title again, please.
Fake Dates and Mooncakes.
Awesome.
And it's by Shirley. And it it comes out, I think it comes out next month. It's super cute.
I think it is time to start transitioning into question and answer time. Does our audience have any questions for us?
Okay. Yes, you first.
I just have a quick question. Sorry, I did read the story already. Antonia seems like a very fleshed out, very larger than life character. And I had a question on, is there a real life inspiration or example, whether from a movie or something else, that you used when you based that character and created her personality?
And so the question, And so the question is that having read the book, Antonia is a really, really cool and complex and fleshed out character. And wondering if you had any particular inspiration in creating Antonia.
I kind of thought about the, like the evil queen and kind of the larger than life Disney villains, in the princess stories, and thought about them and kind of, like Ursula and Maleficent and those kinds of characters, and thought like that would be a fun, to write someone like that, but I didn't want it to be one note. I didn't just want her to be evil. And so I really tried, and that was one of the things that the edits helped with a lot, was to make her more complex and more, morally gray. And then I had the idea of, her having an apprentice that she failed, which is very Obi-Wan Kenobi. So she has the apprentice that the apprentice actually did become like an evil queen, a kind of a Maleficent character, and so Antonia kind of falls into that kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi with Anakin, role where they failed and now they're trying to make up for it a little bit. Yes, who drives really fancy sports cars.
So it wasn't Cate Blanchett in Lord of the Rings, then, is what you're saying? Because that's definitely what I was thinking.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, that's actually a really good comparison. Yeah, because Antonia has a line that is kind of like, I could be a benevolent queen.
Yeah,
like
super, super scary way.
Yes.
With another hand in the back earlier.
Interacting your back that can use in terms of sort of their experiences in the book, and also if you've had it.
Oh, so that question was, have you had a chance to interact with queer youth who read your books? And then the second part of the question was, have you experienced any book challenges?
So yes, I have gotten the chance to interact with some queer youth. Actually, last night, when I was in Rhode Island, there was I did an event. There were several queer teenagers and young adults in the crowd, and I got to talk with them afterwards, and it was a really great experience. And I was really appreciative that they showed up for the event, and then also was really, just flattered, but also, happy that they liked my books and wanted to come and meet me and talk with me for a little bit. I also get emails a lot and messages on like Instagram and that kind of thing. And I do my best to answer everyone. It's gotten a little overwhelming the past few weeks, and I've missed a lot. But I get messages and emails, and they're so important to me to hear that someone, saw themselves in a character, or that they enjoyed the book and it gave them, so they had a great time reading it, or that they felt seen or represented, or whatever the message is. And it is one of the most rewarding things about being an author. And then for book challenges, I have seen my books on lists from different places. I personally have not, no one's come up to me and said, challenged me face to face, or anything like that, which I hope that continues not to happen. But I have seen Indie for Waters, especially. But that's probably because it's been out for a while. I think So This Is Ever After is kind of flying under the radar. And yeah, knock on wood. But I have seen them show up on some of the, the expansive lists of books that have shown up on, in certain states.
Ever After, there's kind of breaks where you include the journal of like essentially like a girl in this house who never gets saved. What inspired you to like include that like wildly, it's very cute but also like extremely tragic like across this like otherwise like happily ever after kind of setup.
So the question is, in So This Is Ever After, there is a motif throughout the book of excerpts from journals from a princess who's locked in a tower who has, is it a spoiler to say
well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. She has a tragic end. They find her dead in the second chapter. Yeah. And again, another scene where it's like, I make a Super Mario joke as they find her dead body. Like, oh, your princess isn't here. She's dead. She's not even in another castle.
She's there. She's just dead.
So actually, I was just using in the narrative, using the journal as kind of a foil to Auric's, and how he gets ideas and how disastrously it goes. And I really didn't think anything beyond that. But then at the end, this it's been out for a year. Y'all should have read it by now. Sorry.
It's also a rom-com, like there's some expectation.
Well, yeah. So but even though the princess herself has a tragic end, it is that storyline is wrapped up and has a hopeful, kind of ending, not even hopeful, but has a kind of gives the other person in that story closure. But actually I did an event with Stephen Salvatore, who is the author of And They Lived, and has another book coming out that I cannot remember the name of, but it's coming out this year. And he mentioned to me that when he was reading it, he felt that it was kind of a narrative about how how queer elders may have been their story, but then how Auric and Matt are representing like the happy ever after that's possible for queer folk now. Yeah, I was really appreciative when Stephen presented that to me like that. I was like, yeah, that's actually really good, thanks.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna say, to live in the world of any of your books.
You guys can answer too. I feel like I'm just yap.
Your answer, I can't think of one. My books are bleak.
I just did a Little Women retelling set in World War II, and I think I could go back there. It would be interesting to go back to World War II and explore 1943. I'm sort of particularly fascinated by that era because it's when my grandparents were young, and so yeah, I would briefly visit and then like to come back to all the freedoms and rights that we have today.
Of mine, I would, it's gonna sound like I'm just promoting Spellbound, but I would actually be at Spellbound, I think. In Deeper Waters, I grew up like on the water and on boats and stuff, and I don't want to get back to that. And then So This Is Ever After, I would strangle Auric. So it would be Spellbound, and I wouldn't even hang out with Rook and Son. I would hang out with Fable. Fable's one of the other mentors, one of the other sorcerers, and they are just kind of chill. That's kind of what I need in my life. So the question is, why won't FT write a series?
Sorry, it was phrased very nicely.
No, yeah, and the other part, the nice part of that question is what's good about standalones. So earlier in my career, I did write a trilogy and I wrote a duology, and I flatly told my friends if the words series came out of my mouth again to slap me, because it was just. And I really appreciate fantasy series. I really appreciate authors that can do that can write, these meaty, 3-book series or more. And I think that's just an amazing skill that I don't have. But also I like to genre hop. My In Deeper Waters is a fairy tale. This is Ever After is a fantasy. This is a contemporary fantasy. The book that I'm working on now is a kind of Faustian retelling weird thing. And so I like to, come up with fun ideas, write them down, beat them into submission until they turn into a book, and then move on. And standalones for me too. I know there's a lot of readers that do love a series, but there's some readers like myself that just, like having a book that is contained, wraps up nicely, and then that's it. And you can read those in between your long series that you're reading. So what about y'all? Do you guys like series or standalones?
Good question for you, Jess.
Yeah, I've done both. I don't know. I think I'm pulled towards series a little. I would love to try to write. My husband is also an author, and he's working on an adult mystery series. And I love the idea of being able to write something that's so ongoing. It could be 6 or 7 books or more. Yeah, I just like the
and I
idea of-
really admire that. It's just not my wheelhouse at all.
Yeah, I love the idea of getting to really develop a town with a whole cast of quirky characters. That sounds great.
That does sound fun.
So, as a reader of manuscript, one of the biggest things that happens is that there's some pushback for being clear. And what I love so much about this author is that there's never any pushback about that. I was wondering if that's anybody's read about these art is really trying to fall into this
Literally trying to fall in love with anything, anybody, anywhere.
That's a great question. The question is, as a frequent reader of queer romance novels, which I bet describes a lot of people in this room, there is a very, very common theme in many, many queer romance novels in which there is pushback against the queer characters for being queer at some point, whether it's a major plot point or simply minor, microaggressions type stuff. And yet in your books, not so much. Please talk about that.
Why does FT only write queer normative fantasies? So one of the big things with Spellbound is that the characters are queer, and there are 2 main non-binary characters, and it is when Sun, who is the non-binary character, meets Rook. Rook says, how should I refer to you when I talk to Antonia about who brought this cursed doll by? And Sun says, please refer to me, use they, them. And Rook says, okay, great, thanks. And that's it. And that's one of the goals that I had for this book, was to show just how easy acceptance is. It is that easy. It should be that easy. And it, you know, in right now where queer kids and trans youth and non-binary youth and gender fluid youth are finding themselves at the center of conversations where, you know, there's questions about if they get to exist. I can't imagine how hard that is, to be a teen. Being a teen itself is just difficult. And then having that environment around you, that I really just wanted to have a book where a reader can open the pages, read it, feel accepted, see themselves, and it not, you know, it give them some respite for a time. And that is, you know, one of the goals of Spellbound itself. And it's, you know, the goals of a lot of my books is that, you know, they should be, they're fantasy, they're fun, they're a break for, you know, readers. That was my little soapbox moment.
Thank you for sharing your world and also for changing our in your perspective. So two very boring questions. One, how do you feel about fan fiction related to the world you created? And two, if you would like to, please share an example of how you've overcome writer's block in your.
So the questions were, how do I feel about fan fiction of my worlds? I think fan fiction is amazing. That is the highest form of flattery. That someone is so inspired by something that I wrote or some characters that I created that they want to continue on and that they want to create something with those. I think that's super cool.
Do you read fan fiction of your work?
No. And there's actually reasons for that. And that is because in case ever FT does write a series, and says, ooh, you know what, I have an idea for Arik and Matt, or I have an idea for Rook and Son. I don't want someone to go, they lifted it from my fanfic, you know? And so not that anyone would ever say that or anything, but you know what I mean? It's just CYA. What do you guys think about it? Fanfic of your works?
Oh, I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've found fanfic of my own work, but I love like reader art is such an enormous compliment.
Fan art is so cool.
Yeah, and and we're allowed to look at fan art. Yeah, that's my favorite thing. My favorite thing in the world is to be at a book festival for teens, and the teen comes up to me and gives me like something they've drawn of my characters. I'm like, this, you were my favorite person in the world. Forget my own children. Like you're.
I've actually seen some folks do cosplay of, there's someone who did an amazing cosplay of Tal from In Deeper Waters, and they sent me like all the pictures. And I was like, this is the coolest thing. You've taken so long to make this beautiful tale. It was so awesome. And there was another part to your question that I have completely forgotten it.
Share an example of writer's block and how you fixed it, and please tell us too, so we can.
Well, what do you? I mean, like, so this is kind of during the pandemic. It was really difficult, and that is because I get so much inspiration, like I said, from interaction. Even though I'm socially so bad, I get a lot of inspiration from being around people. And also at the time I had a day job where I drove a lot, and just driving in the car and experiencing, you know, different places and seeing them. And like I said, you know, the idea for Spellbound came from driving back from, you know, Dragon Con and talking to my brother on the phone and having just been around a ton of different people in Atlanta. And so not having that and being at home all the time and my job changing and not being able to get that kind of outside stimulation was really difficult. And I had a hard time with that, with coming up with, you know, stories and ideas at that point.
For me, I think I get stuck sometimes when my character has made a wrong choice. and this happens all the time. It happened in the middle of the book that I'm working on right now, which is set in 1947 at a former maternity home that's haunted. And I try to go back to the last place that I felt unstuck, where like something exciting was happening and I felt good about it. And then I have my characters make a different choice. Because I feel like, there's like the kind of writer's block where you're like, this is bad. And like that, I feel like you just have to push through. And I like try to fix by setting a timer or something like that, where I'm just like, just writing, like just drafting like words, and then I can fix them later. But then the other kind is like, my subconscious is trying to tell me like I like took a wrong turn in the story somewhere. And so then I try to go back and make a different choice.
I feel like for me, that's what it is. Like 99% of the time, if I have writer's block, if I'm struggling to get past a certain point, it's because I've done something that I shouldn't have done. Not that the characters made a bad choice, but that I made a bad choice as the writer. And so I try to go back and, go back to some point or other. And usually it's a lot of work and I have to toss something out and go back, but it's always better once I do that. And once I, am willing to go back and undo what I did.
There's definitely been, times where I started a book and I've realized it's the wrong character speaking, or realized that it's in first person POV and it should be in third, or it's in third, or like with Spellbound, it started with the wrong scene, and then realized I had to unstick myself by going backwards and fixing, or changing the tense or changing the person who's speaking or whatever.
Question about you setting it is not when you're coming back. If you have to do this magic, or you have to do this.
Well, the question is, that did I do any research for setting it in Atlanta? It's technically not set in Atlanta. It's just kind of inspired by Atlanta. It's actually set in a alternative kind of world. The city itself is called Spire City, so it's really just kind of a regular kind of city setting. And so the answer is no, I did no research. That's the way to get around doing research, is just set it somewhere, and be like, no, I just made it up.
But then you have to do all the work of making it all up. It's just as much work as doing the research.
Well, I mean, to each his own.
Not saying, I'm just saying that you do a lot of work anyway. I'm not saying that you should change your ways. I think that Spire City is amazing.
I have a question, which is about jinxes, which is if you, I love the jinxes in the book, and I would like you to tell me a jinx that you would like to cast on an enemy. And I will give an example of the jinx that I would like to cast on an enemy, which is that I wish that they would burn their tongue the first bite of their favorite food every time.
So I would okay, so in the book there's a categorization. There's curses, hexes, and jinxes. And jinxes are like the lowest level, and then hexes are mid, and then curses are like the worst. And that is not a jinx. That is definitely like a hex, maybe even curse. I mean, I'm a little scared of you right now. A jinx is things like, hitting every stoplight on the way home. That's a jinx. So also, I don't have enemies. What are you talking about?
Let's say certain political leaders, for example.
I think I just made an enemy.
Robin, how would you like to jinx someone?
No, I don't have a good idea. I just know people I'd like to jinx. There's a lot of them like up the road in that big round, building. So I wouldn't do more than jinx them, I suppose. More like a hex. I don't know. But maybe something worse than the food biting into thing, though. We're about to like incite a,
There's a lot of like fun things in the book, like different curses and jinxes and hexes. The one that I really enjoy is there is a tea set, and it's a set, so it can't be broken up, and it's in the cabinets at where Antonia works. And one of the teacups, every fourth cup of tea tastes like soap.
Awful. Like a curse right there.
One more question. Great. Microphone. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. And that had me giggling in the back. I'm sure you could all hear me giggling from back there. So we will transition into our signing line real quick. So if you are willing and able to put your chair to the side by our romance section, and we're going to begin our signing line at the science section. Just give us a moment to pull out our table, get our chairs set up, et cetera, et cetera. And if you need to purchase a copy of the book, they are upstairs. We have books for all three authors here.
Thank you,
Huzzah.
everyone.
I'm not that flustered.
That was like a really